Hi, everybody. Thomas Miller on the Fun Astrology video podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. We are going to talk about something today that is going to be absolutely foundational to most everybody watching this video over the next 20 years. We're going to take a special look at it today, and obviously we're talking about the one aspect and really the only aspect of this week, Pluto entering the sign of the water bearer on November 19th, Tuesday. Here's the chart, just looking at Pluto itself. Just shy of 3:40 in the afternoon in, may we never forget, Asheville on the East Coast. Your time may vary just a minute or two on either side, but that's Pluto entering for the next 20 years until 2044, the sign of Aquarius. Now, this is going to be an incredible time in our history, on our planet, and we're going to take a special look at it. This is not going to be your mother's Pluto entering Aquarius video, I promise. And I hope you'll share it with your friends. And I hope this will motivate you to subscribe and like this video so that I'm for some reason got a algorithm busting thing going on here, and maybe Pluto entering Aquarius will help with this. Or you could help with this by liking and subscribing. So we would appreciate that. But share it with your friends if this makes sense to you. We're going to look ahead at what we're going to be forthcoming over these next 20 years. I put this into a slide presentation. We're going to go through it quickly, expediently, because there is a lot. But I want you to see something that I don't think most people are connecting. And that is that we have two cycles going on here with Pluto moving into Aquarius. It is part of a bigger Pluto cycle of the 250-year orbit that Pluto takes to go around the sun. We do have a significant 250-year theme in our history, and we're going to see it very clearly today as we walk back from 2020, the last three 250-year cycles. And this also is significant because Pluto has to be in Capricorn, Saturn's ruling sign. In the 1770s, Saturn was not there, so it was just Pluto in Capricorn, and that's extra significant as well. And that's what's wrapping up on Tuesday afternoon. Pluto will leave Capricorn for the last time in 250 years. Then we have the 20-year cycle. That's Pluto's average time in a sign. So as we look at this from a historic perspective, Saturn and Pluto conjoined in the sky in 1284. Then Pluto entered Aquarius in 1286 and 87. That's the retrogrades going back and forth. But just like now, by 1287, it was fully in Aquarius for about 20 years. You'll see how these go together. Saturn and Pluto conjoined in October of 1518. Pluto entered Aquarius in 1532. Now, in 1770, only Pluto was in Capricorn. Saturn was in Libra. But then, by 1777, Pluto left Capricorn and entered Aquarius, and that was the zigzag over those 2 years. Then the big one for our generation, Saturn and Pluto conjoined in January of 2020, and it entered Pluto the first time last year, came back out in retrograde twice. It danced back and forth across that line. And on Tuesday, it enters Aquarius again for the last time. It will be there for 20 years. They go together, and that's the significance here. So as we look at, let's go back now, 3 walks back. We're going to go all the way back to 1284. Saturn and Pluto conjoined in the sky in December of that year. Pluto entered Aquarius over the 2 years, 1286 and 87. The 1300s, I just pulled, you don't get a lot of great history from the 1300s, but there is certainly significant history from the 1300s. And this statement was just from a quick online search, and I thought it just nailed it perfectly. Significant turmoil in Europe, including the devastating Black Death pandemic, the bubonic plague. Also the 100 Years' War between England and France, major famines, the decline of the feudal system, leading to significant societal and economic changes across the continent. Also during that time was the formation of the Ottoman Empire. And if you don't know what that is, you've probably heard the term, but it was one of the most long-lasting empires of modern history. Islamic empire that ruled over large parts of the Middle East, Eastern Europe, and Northern Africa, 3 continents, for centuries, spanning from here the late 13th until 1922. It was this is so significant right here. See, when you look at secular material, it describes the sky. It was one of the largest and most lasting empires in world history, and it was formed under this same aspect that we have now. It encompassed 3 continents, Europe, Africa, and Asia. We also had the 100 Years' War. The 100 Years' War was a series of battles over, well, from 1337 to 1453, so 120 years. And it was between England and France. And a notable figure, and this is so key, when I saw this, I was like, because there's such a parallel here. Joan of Arc, a French peasant, commoner, average, normal person, not a leader, not a television personality, not a celebrity, a peasant, rallied the French forces. Keep that in mind. And it says that France eventually prevailed. Let's skip up to 1518. Saturn and Pluto conjoined in the fall of that year. Pluto entered Aquarius in 1532. Just before the Saturn-Pluto conjunction, Martin Luther tacked his 95-point thesis to the door of a Catholic church in Germany. In essence, in modern-day terminology, you would say he sent the Pope an email and said, "We're not doing it this way anymore." Well, the Pope didn't slow down. In 1532, he abolished the Republic of Florence, which had existed since 1115, and established an absolute monarchy. Now notice that, because that's part of this tension and this battle that we're going to come back to as we continue to look at these themes. But notice, he abolished a republic, and he established himself as an absolute monarchy. But also under this conjunction, King Henry VIII broke from Rome in 1534 when the Act of Supremacy was passed by Parliament, establishing himself as the head of the Church of England and effectively severing ties with the Catholic Church and with the Pope in Rome, which began the shift from Rome as the political and religious leadership of the time to London, King Henry of England, and fast forward over the next 250-year cycle, by that time the sun never set on the British Empire. So the expansion after these initial challenges is a theme that we also see repeating here. Now we move to the late 1760s and 1770s. Pluto was in Capricorn from 1762 to 1777. It entered Aquarius then and danced back and forth over the new year of 1778. But of course, and we're not going to regurgitate this history, it's more familiar, the American and French revolutions, the Declaration of Independence. I mean, this is just, even the wording of it fits this so perfectly. And remember Joan of Arc? Well, 250 years later, a guy by the name of Paul Revere, who was just a tradesman. He was a goldsmith at the time. He was kind of a Renaissance guy. He did other things, including dentistry of that era. It said it wiring false teeth into people's mouths. Could you imagine? But remember how it said France prevailed? America prevailed, and the energy was shifting again. Now we have Saturn and Pluto conjoining in January of 2020, January 12th. It was about 10 o'clock in the morning Eastern Time. Pluto entered Aquarius for the first time last year, dancing across, entering permanently now on Tuesday. What have we had so far? Well, it was late January that we started to hear about this pandemic. I think it was March when the World Health Organization declared it, but it was certainly in our awareness that it was on our shores in January. In February of 2022, Russia invaded Ukraine. In October of 23 was the attack that began the Hamas-Israel conflict. And then I just put this down, and not to be political, but just to say that in November was this election sweep, and we'll keep our eyes on that to see how that fits into this whole spectrum. There's one theme that we have to keep in mind through this, and that is that things were always brighter after the initial hurdle. So in the 1400s, after the 1300s, the Italian Renaissance, and some historians I have read say that it was the best time still of any other historic period to be on this planet. Wow. It all happened under what's taking place this week. The 1600s, and you notice a pattern, the 1400s, the 1600s, the 1800s, as we switched from the 1300s, 1500s, and 1700s. So the 1600s was a period of religious freedom. And as we mentioned before, the sun never set on the new expansion. And it was global expansion. People started to migrate into different areas, different continents, different lands. The 1800s was obviously a time of the land of the free and the home of the brave, an opportunity without suppression and oppression by the crown. You notice how it takes 250 years for us to mess something up? Like we have these great new resets, and then we go down 250 years, and, we've kind of messed it up. We've screwed up a steel ball, if you will. But we have a history of doing that, and we are now at the end of a cycle more than at the beginning. We're transitioning out of one into a new one, whatever that new one is going to become. Now, when Pluto moves into Aquarius, there are three aspects waiting for it immediately that we need to consider. The first is that Pluto is going to be in a favorable trine aspect to Uranus. This is a 120-degree aspect. Uranus is still in retrograde, as you can see by that little RX, that red RX indicates retrograde. Still moving backward, but it is a favorable aspect. It was also in place back in the 1700s. There's your revolution right there. If Aquarius wasn't enough, Uranus is the modern ruler of Aquarius, and together they combine to form this spirit of revolution. And this is a trine. So as we look to the future from here, and it could be over 100 years into the future. That's the way it's basically been in the past, somewhere between at least 50 to 70 years on the short end to 100 on the long end. So this is not that, by January or February or December of next year that everything is going to be great. This is a transition phase that, if history parallels and history repeats, will take a while. The other aspect that is super significant is that Pluto finds itself directly across from Mars. Mars is the planet of war. Oppositions are challenging aspects. The mundane does not really know how to respond to these things. Typical people that are just living day by day, driven by their head and what they can think, not what they intuit, not what their spirit says, might have a propensity to go to war. It could be, because that Mars sitting across from Pluto as it enters Aquarius is a big theme. And Mars is getting ready to turn retrograde in December, so it's going to sit there for a while. And Pluto takes forever just to move 1 degree. So these two are going to be sitting across the chart staring at each other for quite some time. In fact, most of into the 2/3 or half of next year before they start to finally separate. That's another big aspect of consideration. Don't forget the intensity. Both of these are the two most powerful planets in astrology. They're sitting across from each other. They're not opposites attract. Opposites can also repel and push against each other. And when you put that with the revolutionary perspective of the Uranus trine, there's going to be that desire, like in the heart of Joan of Arc and in the heart of Paul Revere, to transform. But how will it take place? Will it be through war and conflict? or might it be through peaceful spiritual new dimensions? And that's something we're going to look at in just a minute as well. There's one other aspect. It's not exact. Pluto and Jupiter here are in what's called a sign-based trine. In other words, they're not within the number of degrees that we need for them to be connected in astrological terminology, but also the ancient astrologers and even horary astrology allows for two planets to be in the same sign and be connected. So that's what we have here. So Jupiter is expansion, and we could grow like crazy under this new era that we're entering, but we also could overgrow, and we've listed that as one of the challenges that we're going to be keeping our eye on. Too much expansion, too much growth, too much of a good thing is not a good thing, right? So what themes might we look out for here? Well, we've already seen a pandemic. Remember the 1300s? The pandemic basically was the last thing in the string of occurrences between that 1284 Saturn and Pluto conjunction. That period ended with the pandemic, the bubonic plague. And this is what I want you to get from this, because when I heard that we were going to have a pandemic and had been studying this around the Saturn and Pluto conjunction, I thought, oh, so we're starting with the pandemic this time. Okay, but already kind of had seen that we have wars and famines and climate change, but then it was the other way. It got cold across Europe. Crops froze, livestock froze during the 1300s. There was a war. There was an economic collapse. So, you stack all of this up and you just go, well, history might repeat itself. And then there was a pandemic. And then we had this worldwide pandemic, first one that we've had since 1918, the Spanish flu. And we're like, oh. So see, that's what, in putting this together, and if you understand this, then when things go cray-cray and the rest of the world doesn't understand, you can go, oh, we're doing that now. Okay. And it won't bother you as much. You won't be afraid, and it won't be of concern, because, remember, everything is always brighter on the other side. It always gets better from here. Now, one of the other things that we need to keep in mind as we think about this, and I'm not creating anything here, and I'm not putting anything into the space, but one would be amiss if a good astrologer didn't mention that all things nuclear, this is from nuclear power to nuclear war, is ruled by Pluto. And with the world in the place that it is, and with the technology that we have accessible today, if we did not just at least mention that, and what we can do with that is to offset that with our own prayers, to just pray. And in fact, I think Ray Merriman talks about it in one of his recent writings, or maybe in the Forecast 2025 book that I'm narrating for Audiobook right now, that, that's the last thing that we need on this planet. So let's just acknowledge it, not get absorbed by it, and we will offset it with our intentions. And that's, I think, the best way to handle that. Another theme to watch, obviously, and everyone's talking about all of this. This is the cookbook stuff that's not uncommon. Technology, obviously AI. But think back, what happened in the 1600s? The invention of the printing press after the 1500s transition into this. We're talking about flying rockets to Mars and inhabiting Mars. Well, remember the 1600s, the push across Europe, the expansion, other parts of Africa, into Asia, and then eventually over into the Americas. And then robots. Well, think back. After about 150 years, let's say, from the 1770s changes that we had, we invented the automobile. So these are areas that we definitely could see develop under this, and they're going to grow right under our noses, but we need to be alert to this, because I'm going to advocate in a minute that there are going to be some incredible investment opportunities around this. So one of the battles that we're going to be addressing is, and just watch for this, restriction through technology. And we can already see that with apps that track your movement, apps that track your health, that you might have to have certain health things that you may or may not want to put into your body or may not want to do for your own self, you may lose some of that control if you want to be a part of society. This is the book of Revelation kind of stuff. You know, the mark of the beast, the 666, the whole thing is a technological imprint of control. So we would be remiss if we don't think that we're not knocking more on that door than we ever have in our history. And there could be restrictions through control devices that are new technology. On the positive side, there could be incredible breakthroughs in medicine and science through this transit. Those are all prime for development. So here again, the power, control, centralization, decentralization, who's going to win? And I think there's going to be a definite battle around these lines because Pluto in Aquarius is a revolutionary sign. Pluto is pure power, 3 times Mars. So you bring that in, and then you put it across from Mars, and there's, like we showed in that other chart, there is going to be this battle and power for control. So if one of my favorite descriptions of Aquarius is "don't tell me what to do," you know, if you know an Aquarian, you're laughing right now, right? Or if you are an Aquarian, you're going, "Yeah, that's me," or "that's my friend." I have a number of Aquarians in my family, and when I finally learned this through astrology, it was like, so late. I wish I had learned this years ago. But if you know somebody who's an Aquarian, you deal with them with kid gloves. You just give a lot of space because they demand it. It's part of how they're wired. It's who they are. So you respect it. But they have this fierce independence. What's the opposite of that fierce independence? That radical individualization. Authoritarian control, right? So there's part of that battle, and that's exactly what we're going to be seeing shape up. We've already seen it, but I think it's just going to be a lot more prevalent as we go forward. Now, the other one that I wanted to mention, and this is why I said make note of Joan of Arc and Paul Revere, because the other thing that I'm wondering, and I think this is bigger than we would give it credit, you almost would skip over this. Apathy versus, best I could come up with, fiery passion, particularly from common people. Because of that trine with Uranus, we are going to be experiencing a culture, a dynamic, a movement where people are going to want to perhaps break free from authoritarian control, just like in those other 2 examples. However, one of the things that I think is most prevalent today, and very much unlike the 1770s when America was founded, is the apathy that exists today. People are so consumed with their own, and see, technology has contributed to this too, because we're in our phone, we block the outside, we have to be somewhere at 9, that's all we're focused on, we're honking at the people that are in front of us, keeping us from progressing toward that 9 o'clock appointment. We're upset when we get there, we're all tense, and we have our appointment and we make it all about ourselves. You know, look at what we do on social media. Somebody will put up a post about a hamburger, and you read the comments, and it's, "Oh, I had a hamburger yesterday. It was delicious. Oh, I love to cook hamburger." You know, it's like about, wait a minute, I posted about a hamburger. Why aren't we talking about a hamburger? You know, it's like, oh yeah, it's about me. And that's and what that translates into in this kind of context is that I'm not concerned about the future, and I'm not concerned about what kind of world my kids and grandkids will grow up in. I'm concerned about me and my world right now, right here, and that turns into societal apathy. And you see it everywhere. People today won't lift a finger. In fact, open crime can be committed in a parking lot, and people will literally walk by and turn the other way, even if somebody is on the ground being beaten up. Today, people are not going to get involved. And I think that's one of the biggest dangers we have in front of us as this whole dynamic takes place, because that authoritarian control, if there is apathy from the commoners, will run right over us. Where is the Paul Revere today saying, "The British are coming, we better get ready"? Hard to find. Truly hard to find. Here's the chart of Paul Revere. I couldn't stand it. I had to go find it because I wanted to see where Mars was related to Pluto. April 18th, 1775, at about 10 p.m. in Boston is when he began his ride. Mars is in a quincunx. Now that's a tense aspect. And look, it's in that square to Uranus. And notice that Pluto, during the 1700s, was in that same trine to Uranus during those years. So not an unsimilar characteristic. You could almost interpret this the same because of the square to Uranus and because of that quincunx, which is a tense aspect. We basically have, that's the green line, the quincunx. It's 150 degrees. The square, of course, is 90 degrees. The trine is 120 degrees. That's why you have that symmetry that you do. Now, let's look at some themes. Where can we make this significant in our own lives? What should we be watching for? Well, I had to put this at the top because I truly do think it is one of the primary things that could happen through this time, and that is a spiritual shift, an awakening. This is the Dolores Cannon, 3D, 5D, 6D, 8D, whatever. New elevations of consciousness could absolutely happen under all of this, and without lifting a finger. We don't have to do anything except release the old. That's the message. Get rid of all that. Capricorn in this mundane kind of interpretation represents all the old stuff that doesn't work anymore. All of those areas, the dark ages, the middle ages, first of all, the void of history, and nothing happened on this planet during those times. And then within 100 years, boom, that happened in the late 1200s and into the 1300s, and through the 1300s we go, and we had this most amazing time to be on the planet. I mean, how could we go from the Dark Ages to the Italian Renaissance? That's what we're dealing with here, folks. This is what I'm saying is we are talking about a massive shift. And if that happens spiritually, this place could be unrecognizable in 100 years. It truly could. Now, between here and there are likely to be conflicts and war. So we have to watch for that. There also could be I just said medical issues. We've already had the pandemic, so not much would surprise us from here. There could be new diseases. There could also be new treatments. So we're going to keep an eye on the big, broad category of medical developments. Conquests. There's that whole thing of wanting to, remember the 100 Years' War was a battle between England and France. England wanted to take over France. France didn't want to be taken over. France finally won. And from that, of course, the rebellions, the revolutions, the American Revolution, the French revolutions, all of these things are characteristic of these times. The status quo being challenged, that's Capricorn dying. All things represented by Capricorn in this area. Now, this is not natal interpretation of Capricorn. Please don't get me wrong there at all. Capricorn is wonderful in a natal chart. But in mundane astrology, it represents the institutions. And then when we apply the 250-year cycle, those institutions get corrupted. So the old guard hangs on. We could also see major, incredible advancements across so many fronts. So that's something to really watch for. And as an investor, if you want to make some money, you could save now, start to build some investable assets, and be looking for some of these emerging technologies because could be incredible in this area, like nothing we've ever seen in our lifetimes. New explorations means going to new areas. Remember back in the 1600s, people started to migrate across continents. In the 1800s, they started to migrate from the East Coast to the West Coast of the United States, all the new exploration of the development of this country. So we could have new explorations, and one of them already underway that is targeted is to other planets. AI, these other technological advances, that kind of goes without saying at this point, but we have to say we're going to keep our eye on it and all of the implications. A lot of people are losing their jobs right now because of AI. Another one that I would keep our eye on are the commoners. How are we all going to respond? People who don't have huge platforms. How will we all respond to this? Are we going to be run over and just apathetically sit down? Or are we going to fight for our freedom when people try to control us? Because those are the other areas to watch for. Watch for that control. And then just to keep in mind that we are in this epic shift of eras as represented by every other time Saturn and Pluto have conjoined in the sky in the sign of Capricorn. The big parentheses is this is in Capricorn that we're talking about. That's what you have to trace back. And then just a tremendous expansion following all of this conflict. So if you were looking for areas to prosper in this, obviously when there's major growth, that always has a ripple effect. The rising tide floats all boats here. So there could be in any given area expansion, eventually. The arts, humanities, spirituality, Renaissance. I'm thinking of the Renaissance of the 1400s, 1500s. During those years, all areas benefited. In fact, look at where so much of the growth of the Renaissance was. It was in the arts and the humanities, architecture, music, spirituality. Whoa. Give you chills. A spiritual awakening. And if there is a spiritual awakening, there are going to be opportunities for teaching, training people in the new way. Now, I put war here because we have to, basically. War is profitable, unfortunately. And this is where, as you and I start to express our voice and we say, wait a minute, we're not fighting that battle anymore. We're not spending that money on weaponry anymore. But as long as the war machine continues, war does increase investment opportunities into the areas related to the war. So sad. Keep it in mind. Hopefully that shifts. Now, real estate development and travel, that's all that migration. So as people become even more moving around, I mean, we saw a bunch of it during COVID where people left the cities, but there could be a lot more moving around and development. And with that, there will be the need for new communities and new businesses. And if you're an architect or a builder, could be a good time. We've already mentioned medicine and science. We won't repeat that, but it is on the list. New sources of energy. I mean, bona fide, real, true, new, developed sources of energy. Let me just use a wild example. Let's say that hydrogen power for automobiles becomes a thing. Well, conversion kits could be an explosive area of sales because cars will have to be converted or new cars constructed. Another one that's really underway now is death and dying. In other words, higher vibe, higher vibration ways of transitioning from the planet. And I know quite a few people who have worked in these death areas, death doulas, people who will go sit with loved ones in a new way, not a hospice kind of way. Not that hospice is bad, I'm saying, but I just say that one of the opportunities could be, and I know a lot of people are connected with this. They're very interested in helping people transition and investing in training and even their time, maybe partial career or a new career. And also, I couldn't leave this list without thinking of our fur babies. Don't you agree? You know, that there could be new connections and new ways of relating to animals in our life. So those are some ways that I think we could look at the years ahead as we really now, beginning this week, start to enter a new era. It's going to be incredible. It is going to be amazing. It's exciting. We also have another big aspect that's going to be taking place right in the middle of it. In 2026, Saturn and Neptune are going to conjoin right there at 0 degrees Aries, and that's a whole nother subject. Fortunately, I am getting to absorb it all over again in Ray Merriman's Forecast 2025 book. So that will be out. We'll be mentioning it on the podcasts. It will come out in mid-December. I would highly recommend it because he talks about how all of that threads together. That's not today's topic, but it is one to keep in mind for the future. If I go back, if I can just say this, and then I'll wrap up. The Saturn-Pluto conjunction of 1284, to me, is the most like the one that we had this year as far as how the planets were all kind of aligned. So it very well could be maybe we're transitioning to what will now become the best time to be on the planet. How cool would that be? Just an amazing ride. Thank you so much for watching. I love you. I appreciate you. Buckle up, Buttercup, and get lots of popcorn. I'll see you next week. Have a great week.